Welcome back, Silicon Gang. I saw somebody on the inner tubes talking the other day about how RISC-V is going to replace x86 and ARM. So I was thinking about making a video about how RISC-V is not happening, and it's not going to happen. But then there was some news. Before we get to that news, let me lay down some context about how I see RISC-V and its evolution so far. RISC-V is a fairly new processor instruction set that originally came from UC Berkeley and is now managed by an open source community. It's totally free and open, so there are no licensing fees or NDAs, and anyone who cares can participate in defining and evolving the standard. In theory, this openness is supposed to motivate something similar to the open source software revolution, but in processors. There are a lot of companies involved in RISC-V. Just the Platinum members include Google, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Samsung, and Western Digital. Lower down, there are Allwinner, HPE, Hitachi, Huawei, IBM, MediaTek, Mellanox. You get the picture. And there are tons of RISC-V cores and chips being developed. Their website shows 69 different cores and SoCs announced so far. So why did I say that RISC-V was not happening? Because what's been announced so far is extremely underwhelming. Let's look at some dev boards that you can buy if you want to use RISC-V. For a while, the only thing available was the HiFive 1. This is from a startup called SiFive, who are pretty much the leaders in RISC-V. As you can see, this board is Arduino compatible, so it's not very powerful. It's 320 plus megahertz, but it has a whopping 16 kilobytes of RAM. In particular, you can't run any real OS on this Arduino class microcontroller. Fortunately, a little later, SiFive came out with the HiFive Unleashed board, which has a more powerful SoC that can run Linux. In fact, this is the only RISC-V chip that can run Linux if we take them at face value. So out of all the stuff that's been announced, there's one that's good enough to run Linux. One. All the rest are microcontrollers. Don't get me wrong, microcontrollers are a huge market. For every real CPU, there might be 5 to 10 microcontrollers sold, kind of like how there's much more plankton on Earth than animals. RISC-V has huge potential in microcontrollers because when you're selling a chip for $1, any cents that you can save on licensing matter. But microcontrollers aren't that interesting to me, and they're a very long way from the world domination that some people are predicting. Going from one very slow chip to something that's phone class, laptop class, or server class is not a matter of incremental improvement. It's a completely different game. And even having dozens of companies playing the wrong game isn't any better than zero. But just a few days ago, we saw a sign of real progress. The same company, SiFive, that made those two boards, just announced a core called the U84. If RISC-V has been in a coma for the last few years, it just opened its eyes. It hasn't said anything yet, but the doctor, that's me in this analogy, is paying attention. Here's a look at the U84 core. In 7 nanometer, it's about a quarter of a square millimeter. For comparison, a Zen 2 core is just over 3 square millimeters, so U84 is 1/13 the size of what we would call a huge core. They also claim that the U84 has very competitive performance when compared to an ARM Cortex-A72 from 2015. Now we're getting somewhere. Conveniently, the Cortex-A72 is also what's in the Raspberry Pi 4, so we have a good point of comparison. They have moved up from the Arduino level to the Raspberry Pi level. And if you want to put that in x86 terms, it should be in the ballpark of an Atom or Jaguar core. So once this comes to market, it should at least be decent. This is the latest and greatest RISC-V CPU announced, mind you. Going back to SiFive, the U84 is 5 to 10 times faster than the U54, which was in the Unleashed dev board we just looked at. So on one hand, that's a huge improvement in just a few years. On the other hand, they must have been starting from a very low baseline if their dev board is several times slower than a Raspberry Pi. Maybe the U54 is comparable to the littlest little ARM A35 core. The huge jump from the U74 to the U84 is due to out-of-order execution, the same magic sauce used by the Pentium Pro in 1996. You simply can't be a player in general-purpose processors if you don't have out-of-order, but now RISC-V has this. The next step to watch for is a general-purpose SoC based on the U84, and the step after that is a developer board. Wouldn't it be convenient if the Raspberry Pi 5 was a RISC-V? It probably won't happen due to Broadcom sponsorship. If we don't see new chips or boards, I'm going to declare RISC-V brain dead. So far, I've only talked about SiFive. But what about all those other companies? There are a few other things in RISC-V land that have generated some good hype, but probably don't matter. A company called Esperanto claims to have a very fast, out-of-order core called Maxion, but it looks like they're only going to put that core in an AI accelerator chip. No, don't talk to me about buying an AI chip and not using the AI part. The AI chip market is flooded with startups right now, and almost all of them will die. Probably the fact that Esperanto is using RISC-V will have nothing to do with their eventual success or failure. Western Digital has been pimping RISC-V pretty hard, and they released a core called Swerve that they claim is open source, production grade, and very fast, even though it's in order. But they're probably just going to use it for disk controllers. I don't really care what core is inside some disk controller chip. It sounds great that Western Digital is giving this core away for free, but I'm not aware that anybody is stepping up to do the work of putting this wonder core in an actual general-purpose processor chip that you could buy. NVIDIA is also using RISC-V in some non-graphics part of their GPUs. They're pretty cagey about the details. But the bottom line is they're not using RISC-V for the stuff that developers can see, the shader cores or the ARM cores. They're only using it in the places that we can't really see and don't care about. So yeah, major companies are adopting RISC-V in extremely boring ways that we will never see. Right now, the only potentially interesting stuff is coming from SiFive. In theory, there could be a secret RISC-V Manhattan project going on that will drop some kind of flagship chip out of nowhere. But miracles aren't as good business as you might think. The market usually can't absorb something that comes out of nowhere, so if RISC-V is going to happen outside the embedded market, it needs to continue showing verifiable incremental improvement in performance, ecosystem, and purchasability. That's all I have for this time. As usual, feel free to comment on YouTube or Twitter.